idea was to begin to look at the financing aspects alongside the discussions on the goals that will be formulated, so that that doesn't get neglected, and we have that at the back of our minds and we work on this area. Our specific mandate was to propose options for an effective sustainable development financing strategy to finance the mobilization, to facilitate the mobilization of resources and their effective use. In addition to that, also there was a great appreciation of the huge amounts of resources available in the private sector that could be tapped and mobilized into good use, particularly among institutional investors, pension funds, among others. The policy challenge was really how to mobilize and channel and incentivize these into sustainable development goals. One of the key things stressed by the committee was really that everything had to be underpinned by country ownership and country leadership, even within an enabling international environment. The second issue was a recognition that we need to look beyond financing, that effective policies and institutions also matter, and they are key to any sustainable development strategy. One of the areas of focus was related to transparency and accountability that needs to underpin the financing. And in that context, basically, we also felt that getting an enlarged multi-stakeholder involvement would help advance things in that direction. Looking at the records, we were able to discern a considerable increase in interest in these public-private partnerships as a means of mobilizing financing, particularly for infrastructure across the globe. Although experiences vary depending on region, and within regions even there are differences, and also there were sectors that tended to attract this kind of financing more than others. The underlying principle is that these arrangements were provided good opportunities for mobilizing additional private sector resources. But also I think there was a recognition that beyond the financing, incremental financing, the involvement of public and private, the involvement of private sector in these arrangements could help bring in additional benefits in relation to private sector efficiency, cost competitiveness, innovation, among other things, in addition to boosting opportunities for creating employment, incomes, raising incomes, etc. There are some criticisms that came up, particularly during the multi-stakeholder engagement, some at the philosophical level in relation to the concern that these kinds of arrangements will probably lead to governments reneging on their commitments in terms of functions and duties, in terms of provision of infrastructure, both social and physical infrastructure to facilitate development. Issues about corporate accountability, concerns about the lack of accountability that had been characterized by some of these arrangements, issues, questions about the complementarity itself. Experience has also been mixed, even in developed countries. Basically, it has to be admitted that there has been a lot of failure in these kinds of arrangements. And a large number, in fact, proportionately large number of failures, in some cases up to 25–30% failure rates in these kinds of arrangements. So question marks as to whether that's the way to go. And I think also there have been delays, cost overruns, and oftentimes in our own countries we've experienced that renegotiations a lot of the time when you have to go back and put pressure on government to have this negotiated. One of the points made overall is that there is an unfair sharing of risks. The privatization of benefits and the risk are appropriated by the state. That does, and then are pushed to the state, and the benefit, much of it goes to the private sector. And of course, a couple of things that allow that because of the information asymmetry, the lack of capacity in the public sector, transparency and accountability issues. Clearly, in line with the earlier discussion about the country strategy, country ownership, and effective policies and institutions, we we agreed that a key aspect of this, a key first step is to really create that within the country, at the country level, to have a clear policy, to articulate a clear long-term vision in relation to these public-private partnerships. So aspects of that in relation to the policy also would be the legal and regulatory framework, the rules and procedures, the roles and responsibilities, procurement rules, dispute resolution mechanisms, among other things. These PPPs structure is a very complex process, and they're very and requiring a lot of expertise and requiring a lot of careful planning, design, and management. And in that context, basically, it requires a lot of capacity to be able to handle that institutional capacity. And in some countries, what has been done is to build specialized or to set up specialized agencies, if you like, PPP units within government that will pool resources and expertise and that will focus on getting these things right and guide these negotiations and discussions. And issues related to, we felt strongly, sustainable development, poverty, environment, gender needed to be addressed at the project preparation phase. And I think the key thing about this we appreciated was the good governance really in relation to how these are structured and offered, and also transparency in relation to how these are reflected, to have a full sense in terms of the cost to government. And many instances these become very serious contingent liabilities that come back to haunt you later down the line as you move forward. So we've also been discussing the role of specialized institutions, national development banks, multilateral financial institutions, development finance institutions, in facilitating and enhancing these arrangements in relation to both the provision of long-term funding, in relation to credit enhancement mechanisms, in relation to, and there have been some very promising instances. In the UK, for example, there have been some efforts to mobilize pension funds using a partnership with the Treasury to pool and channel those into the financing of infrastructure. So there are lessons that one could draw on. A number of funds being set up or facilities. The World Bank recently set up a global infrastructure facility. The African Development Bank, Asian Infrastructure Fund. All these have potentially could make a contribution in helping really move this agenda forward, but also a means of pooling expertise and knowledge and helping strengthen policy and regulatory environment. All of these are key. So globally, we feel that there's lots of possibilities for this, but at the same time, there are risks that have to be carefully managed, and we feel that a lot of effort is needed at the national and international levels to ensure that these become possible avenues for financing sustainable development, and then there's scope for learning, for information exchange, for cross-country learning, best practices, among other things. But at the end of the day, we also have to stress that PPPs are not suitable for all types of projects, and we have to be very particular about that. And then secondly, we need to see ways of domesticating and contextualizing some of these recommendations, and that requires a lot more work, a lot more effort, and certainly there's some form of learning by doing experiential learning, if you like.